founding partner and engineer here at Margik. And if you guys have any questions about his presentation, just put them in the Q&A session, and I'll host the Q&A at the end of this meeting.
All right, so without really any further ado, my name is, of course, Adam Earnhardt. I'm a product engineer at Margik, and today I'm going to be very briefly discussing some of our novel use cases of silicon and organic LED materials. So a bit about Margik Incorporated. We are a small company based out of Charlotte, North Carolina, and our mission is to create a future where smart organic electronics enhance our everyday quality of life. We plan on doing this through the commercialization of OLED technologies into alternative markets. So instead of things like your displays, think of things like, emergency signage, packaging and labeling, OLEDs as sensors in robotics and drug discovery. And some of our patented materials actually enable OLEDs to have about 80% gain on manufacturing speed, an 11% increase in brightness, and are projected to have an indirect reduction in CO2 by about 800 megatons by the year 2050. So before we really dive too deep into our materials, we need to discuss the history of organic electronics, since that's the industry we're really trying to hit on. In 1953 specifically, it was first discovered that organic compounds were electroluminescent and also had other acceptable electronic properties. And a lot of the early research was actually done in that time period, the 50s and 60s. In the mid and late 80s, the first OLEDs were actually first being developed. And you can see through the graph on the right that just the last 2 decades alone, industry and academia has been really interested in OLEDs. So, what's an OLED? Well, shown on the left is actually one of the very first OLEDs. It is a very simplistic structure. As you can see, there's about 3 layers there, made up of various different types of organic molecules. And on the right, we have something a little bit more recent, and as you can see, it's much more intricate. As you can see, all these layers are very short, according to what you see there. They all have shortened abbreviations. I will be covering those now. So an OLED is essentially made up of 3 layers, right? But you can get those to be a little more intricate by adding on additional layers to do a very more specific function. Realistically, all you need is what is known as an electron transport layer, a emitting layer, or electroluminescent layer, depending on who you're talking to, and a hole transport layer. However, over the last few years, we've seen new types of layers to have a increased functional, basically just to increase the overall device efficiency. New layers being added, such as an electron injection layer, hole blocking layers, hole injection layers, hole blocking layers, or electron blocking layers. And overall, this has made the devices much more efficient, have longer lifetimes, be brighter, things like that. Part of where we come in is actually making multifunctional materials that can revert back to a more simplistic structure to make it a just as effective device that also has materials that do, electron injection and hole transport in one layer, or electron transport in one layer, excuse me. So, a bit about the actual patent. Well, the patent actually covers silicon, germanium, and tin, though primarily most of our work has been done on silicon. We are utilizing pincer ligands or cleating ligands to essentially form a hexacoordinate pincer complex of one of these elements that I'd mentioned previously. So the patent specifically covers pincers in uses for hexacoordinate complexes. These pincers are tridentate, and specifically for the patent, they are dianionic. Some of the use cases that are covered in this are, of course, organophotovoltaics, OFETs, organic field effects transistors, and organic LEDs. So what does that sort of look like for us? Well, the use cases for us actually include things like fashion, decoration, packaging and bottling, and just everyday safety measures. So on the left hand here, we have a few different graphic designs of some of those use cases, you know, things like fashion and think makeup, safety, think outdoor wear that illuminates in the dark, think things like for packaging and bottling. Well, first thing I think of when I think of packaging is just a box, right? Decoration, we actually had some fun with this. We made a cute little uh, decorative sticker that illuminates with an OLED inside of it. So now let's actually go into the sort of chemistry behind this. So we have this cool little graphic design that shows what these pincers sort of look like if you were to do a creative design function of this. So some of our success stories actually comes from a common research group that myself and Margaret were in. And on the left, we have her complex, the silicon Bazimpi complex. And as you can see, there's this cool little electroluminescent, fluorescent molecule. Electroluminescence requires actual current. This is just under a UV light. And then we have my success story, my silicon DPP. DPP is not very fluorescent. It is more likely to be these cool little crystals. So unfortunately, I don't have a very cool photo that's luminescent like that, but I do have these cool crystals. So as I'd mentioned, we'd had a little bit of issue making emissive materials. Our silicon pincers are not very emissive, but they are actually really good at charge transport. Shown on the left here are some simplistic devices that we could use to measure electron and hole mobilities. And we use the Mott-Gurney equation to actually get a more reliable sort of charge mobility study. We could potentially have used something like a TOF method of charge transport calculation, but it's really not as useful for OLEDs specifically. OLED's a vertical stack rather than horizontal, and since it's going up and down, we kind of have to account for that. So the Mott-Gurney is actually a lot better in calculations for us. So how do we kind of compare these charge transport properties to other known industry materials? ALQ3 is this compound over here on the bottom left. When actually compared against a similar device where they measured the electron mobility with the Mott-Gurney equation, we can see that we actually outperform the sort of standard for a very long time in terms of electron mobility. There are, of course, newer industrially used charge transport materials like T2T, BFIN, TPBI, and we actually stack up against those pretty well. Silicon DPP actually stands only really outperformed by BFIN, but I believe we are actually within a standard deviation of that electron mobility, so we're getting pretty close to that. So now let's talk a little bit about device manufacturing. So typically what we do to make our devices is thermal evaporation. However, we do also offer solution processing such as spin coating and blade coating. We can use those types of manufacturing to make organic light emitting diodes, organophotovoltaics and solar cells, organic field effect transistors, and even on occasion electrochromic devices. So our community ask is any academic and industry members, if you are interested in beta testing some of our materials for your devices, or you may have a potential use for it in your type of devices, we are always able to provide you with a sample. If you can give us a little bit of feedback, some results on the study, that'd be really, really helpful. We are also raising funding. We're seeking a $400,000 SAFE, and I'd like to thank you for your attention and open the floor for questions.
So if anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A session, or also you can raise your hand and speak live.
Okay, I did see a couple of people come right closer to the end. If we can do a very quick, one more time, bring up the presentation, just quick click through, just so folks can have a quick second of thinking about the questions.
Let me actually present it so it's full screen. 1 second. And there we go. I don't know how quickly you want to go through this.
I got 30 seconds holding on a slide, just
Okay.
so people have a chance to ask any questions. Okay, and we'll start with a little bit of pre-submitted questions. It might give some folks food for thought. So the first question we'll start with is, where do you see these materials being applicable outside of OLEDs?
We discussed this prior. We had actually sort of began to develop an interest in transport materials for OPVs. We have quite a few fairly decent candidates that have been used for ETLs in OLEDs, but we really haven't looked too heavily into OPVs. But we can start look. We're planning on starting to look at those in the next few months. We'll have to probably discuss that a little bit further with our nice little OLED person over here.
And the next question is, what devices have been manufactured and tested with these materials? Is it just OLEDs or something else?
So, for the most part, it is primarily OLEDs. I know that silicon Bazimpi has been tested in an OPV before. I believe it's also been embedded in a polymer to act as a, well, electrochromic isn't the correct term for that. But I know that we've looked into that. I believe we've also done an OFET with silicon Bazimpi, if I recall correctly.
All right, that helps to diversify the portfolio a little bit. And next question is, can you elaborate a little bit more about stability of these materials with respect to moisture, air, temperature, or any other metrics?
So specifically, if we're looking at silicon Bazimpi and DPP, I do know that silicon Bazimpi is stable in water. I know that it does, I believe, form a monohydrate, I believe. I think it does cling on to a single molecule of water, if I recall correctly, but it's been a while since I've done anything with silicon Bazimpi. I know for a fact that silicon DPP, however, doesn't cling on to water. You can put it in DMSO water mixture and it'll stay stable for over a couple months. I think we kind of called the end of that study after month 3. It's pretty stable in water. Thermally speaking, silicon Bazimpi actually has the highest glass onset temperature of about 450 degrees, or maybe slightly lower, maybe 420, now that I think about it. Silicon DPP, however, does have a significantly lower, but still higher than most, glass onset temperature of about 260 degrees.
And is interaction, you mentioned interaction with some of the water molecules, does that decrease performance, increase performance, or no effect?
I am not 100% sure off the top of my head. I don't think it really has had an effect. Realistically speaking, though, you don't want to take water into a glove box, so you shouldn't really do that.
That's still manufacturing problems, right? You still
Yeah,
can't
so
manufacture with any moisture air during the manufacturing process. But it looks like with respect to after the fact, it doesn't seem to have any problems.
right.
And next question is, let me try to paraphrase this a little bit. Do you have ability to pre-design some kind of functionality into those molecules, or you have what you have, and that's what you would be commercializing, or there is a way to alter the performance matrix or any
So
particular?
for clarity purposes, you're asking if these are sort of tailored, if we can tailor
Correct.
these? Yeah,
Correct.
yeah. We can add on different sorts of substituents onto most of the pre-established backbones. We can design new materials quite readily. It just sort of depends on the functionality you're looking for. If you're looking for a higher LUMO, higher HOMO, we can do with that. If you want some specific solvent that you want to have it be soluble in, we can attempt to sort of retroactively synthesize something that would suit that. Um, if you want a higher charge mobility, if we could design something like that specifically, then I think we'd solve a lot of problems. But realistically speaking, that's one of the harder things to design, and it's just sort of a trial and error at this point to actually get to target those mobilities.
All right, thank you for that. And what is the scale of production at this point for these materials? Are we talking about 1 milligram, 10 milligrams? What does that look like?
It depends on the material. We can produce a few hundred milligrams at a time of most up to a gram for silicon Bazimpi. It just really depends on which one you're speaking of specifically. For the most part, though, we can make a couple hundred milligrams, no problem.
Silicon Bazimpi I've done as large as 5. So
Ooh, I didn't know that. Yeah, I know you can make it
secrets.
reliably for a gram. Yeah, but I never personally tried anything past a gram, just because I was like, all right, well, we're throwing a lot of stuff in here, so make sure it works.
Okay, and this is a little bit of, I'll just do my little bit future outlook on the materials, and Adam, feel free to input on any further plans. So right now we're looking at expanding our portfolio for electron transport materials, whole transport materials. We do have history of dipolar and bipolar transport materials as well, to where the whole and electron transport rates are closely, roughly the same, more or less, within the same material, which could be useful for radio
Within a
applications.
standard deviation. It's pretty close, not quite.
Correct. And then we have very good capability on electron transport and whole transport materials, specifically for yellow, red types of OLEDs. And we're currently working towards expanding the band gap so it can become a universal transport material. So you can just use one material across the board for any color: blue, green, yellow, red, or white type of lighting. That is our current works, as well as we're working towards expanding portfolio of solution processability for thicker layers for OLEDs. Right now it's suitable for photovoltaic applications, and we're working on uniformity of printability for OLEDs, since these layers tend to be a little bit thicker. And we have successfully proven and tested in commercial setting with manufacturers, so third-party testing of our electron injection, electron transport materials, and we do know that it does perform highly competitively in the commercial hands of the customers. So if you have a desire to test it out in your system, see if it would be performing for your particular use case, we definitely would request you to contact us at info@margik.tech, or just visit our website on margik.tech. There are plenty of contacts. You can find us pretty easily on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. So if you just look up at Margik Inc., you'll be able to find us and request a sample. We do ask in return to share the results of the study. Obviously keeping your privacy and the study conditions to whatever you don't feel like disclosing, but would be very appreciative of the results of the study. We are looking at photovoltaics applications, OFED applications, OLED applications, sensors of sorts, organic lasers. So if you work in that field, please contact us. We'd be happy to work with you.
Looks like Adesola has his hand raised, so I'm going to hand him the mic. Hi, Adesola. Looks like you're on mute.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you have an emissive layer that has a homolumo gap higher than that of the ETL, what is going to happen?
Are you asking if it's not aligned with an ETL?
Yeah, I'm asking that if we have an emissive layer that has a homolumo gap higher than that of the electron transport layer, will the device still work?
In some cases, it still would work, just highly inefficiently. So you can. That's why single layer devices worked back in the 80s. It doesn't mean they were any good.
Okay.
It's a lot harder for your electrons to enter the emissive layer, so you don't really get too many photons being generated. It's possible you may get like surface interactions. It's not very efficient, like Margaret said. It's possible, but it's terribly inefficient.
All right. One more question. Your DPP, are you using it as an emissive layer or electron transport layer?
Transport layer. It is the quantum yield on it is like 0.0001.
For silicon Bazimpi, we did publish single layer emissive devices where silicon Bazimpi acted as both the transport layer and the emissive layer. So if you want to read about that, please look it up.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, this does have a hard stop, so if you have any more questions, just visit margik.tech.
Yeah.
Oh, what? Yeah, it's about to like kick us out in 20 seconds.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for coming.
Bye.